thought I didn't know about the Christmas Day divorce he planned. But while Marcus Belvedere rehearsed his betrayal, I quietly donated every piece of his family's legacy, under his name. By the time he stood up to ruin me, the world was already praising him for my revenge. If you've ever been stabbed in the back by someone who thought you were too loyal to fight back, hit subscribe right now. Like this video, and share your thoughts, because what I did to Marcus Belvedere wasn't just revenge, it was legacy retribution, gift-wrapped. The snow hadn't started yet, but the sky had that muted silver hue that always warned me Christmas was near. I stood barefoot in the study, the air thick with the scent of old pine wood shelves and secrets. My hands rummaged through a drawer I wasn't supposed to touch, the bottom one in Marcus's antique walnut desk. I wasn't snooping. Not really. I was looking for our old tax returns to prep for a business grant proposal. But as I pulled out the cream-colored files marked 2018, 2019, and so on, something else slid forward, white, crisp, deliberate. The moment I touched the edge of the envelope, my chest went quiet, like my heart paused to listen. Inside were 12 pages, professionally drafted, cold, efficient. Divorce papers. Filed by Marcus Belvedere. My husband of 15 years. The man I once followed across the world, gave up my career for, and helped nurse through 2 failed startups. The man I trusted with everything. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Instead, I sat in the leather chair he always used, the one with the worn arms and tiny scratch marks from his late father's cat. I read every line slowly. Property division. Custody of the vault items. The lake house. My portion of the family shares. But what truly burned wasn't what he wanted to take. It was the date, December 25th. He was going to serve me divorce papers on Christmas Day. That detail made something inside me go quiet and cold, the kind of cold that isn't sad. It's precise. Purposeful. I folded the papers back, slipped them between the folders where I found them, and stood. My reflection in the mirror above the mantel looked different already. There was no panic. Only calculation. That night, Marcus came home from one of his client strategy meetings, the ones I now knew were likely meetings with his attorney. I kissed his cheek, poured his wine, and listened to him ramble about his mother's latest charity gala. I nodded, smiled, said all the right things. Because that's what wives like me are trained to do. We don't break, we observe. I started taking inventory the next morning. Every heirloom in the Belvedere estate had a story, and I knew each one better than Marcus ever had. The 19th century emerald brooch passed down from his great-grandmother Elise. The signed Hemingway manuscript that his grandfather smuggled from Spain during the Civil War. The Byzantine chalice his mother insisted was blessed in Istanbul. For 15 years, I had catalogued, appraised, and protected these things like my own children. And now, they were about to become my symphony. By the end of the week, I had photographed every item. I kept my movements light, deliberate, invisible. Marcus didn't notice a thing. Of course he didn't. He hadn't noticed me in years. We still decorated the tree together, just like we always did. He handed me the old glass swan ornament with that same rehearsed smile and said, "You always know where everything goes, Callista." I smiled back. "Yes," I replied. "I do." That night, after he fell asleep, I wrapped the first box. It was empty, just an elegant illusion. A decoy. It had once held Elise's brooch, which now sat in the vault of a women's refugee foundation, awaiting transfer to their end-of-year gala auction. Donation certificate, signed Marcus Belvedere. It was strange how easily the plan unfolded once I stopped hesitating. I created a spreadsheet with columns, item name, historical value, emotional impact, destination, media strategy. I labeled every cell, color-coded reactions, blue for Margot will scream, red for his mother will faint, yellow for Marcus will crumble. I worked in silence, letting the tick of the Belvedere grandfather clock guide me. Tick. 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 The same clock that Marcus wound every Sunday at 9 p.m. without fail. He wouldn't be winding it this Sunday. It had a new home, the pediatric cancer ward at Hillstone Hospital. Their chief of staff, Dr. Carver, said the children would love hearing the chimes echo through the lobby every hour. A symbol of time and survival, he called it. I smiled through the phone. I gave every artifact a narrative, every donation a moment of impact. The media loved it. Anonymous benefactor. Generational heirlooms given to the people. The donations were made in Marcus's name, of course. His signature was easy. I'd forged it for years on birthday cards he forgot to write, for thank you notes he delegated to me. Besides, what was one more? Each day, a new article appeared. Local museum receives rare collection of early industrial-era ledgers from Belvedere family. Belvedere heir donates Victorian silver to city's homeless program. Children's Hospital acquires historic grandfather clock in generous anonymous gift. Marcus started to twitch. He noticed the headlines over coffee. His grip tightened around the mug, and he'd reread paragraphs, his brow furrowed. But he never asked. Not directly. After all, to question it would mean admitting something was out of his control, and Marcus thrived on control. I wrapped another empty box. Christmas approached, and the house began to feel light. Not hollow. Lighter. The things that had once weighted down, the history, the obligation, the burden of curated legacy, had lifted. Rehomed. Repurposed. Marcus still smiled in photos, still attended board meetings, still practiced his public face. But in the quiet corners of our home, he was cracking. I saw it in his eyes when he stared at the missing lamp in the hallway or noticed the gaps on the library shelves. He'd ask where something was, and I'd tilt my head, innocent. Didn't you move that to the gallery wing? You said you wanted more light. He'd nod, confused. Sometimes he'd just mutter, right. Yes. Of course. Christmas Eve arrived. The final press release was scheduled for 6 p.m. The city's Heritage Museum would unveil the Belvedere Crown Candelabra, a four-tiered gold artifact previously unseen by the public, as the centerpiece for their Treasures of Winter exhibit. I wore red that night, as always. Tradition, Marcus said. He watched the news in silence, the announcer's voice echoing through the room. A remarkable act of generosity from Marcus Belvedere, she said. One that will be remembered for generations. Marcus didn't speak. He poured 2 glasses of wine, handed me one with a look I couldn't quite read. Anger. Confusion. Fear. To Christmas, he finally said. I clinked his glass. To giving. I didn't sleep that night. I stood by the tree, looking at the 12 boxes I had wrapped with surgical precision. Heirloom labels handwritten in calligraphy. Each one a ghost. He would wake up tomorrow thinking he held power. But I had already taken everything, not to destroy him, but to liberate myself. And the best part? Everyone would thank him for it. The Belvedere vault wasn't what most people imagined, no steel door or retina scan. It was older than that. More secret. Tucked behind a false wall in the drawing room, masked by a panel of velvet wallpaper no guest would ever question. A gentle push in the top left corner revealed a small latch. You had to know the exact pressure. Marcus's grandfather used to say, if you can't remember the weight of your legacy, you don't deserve it. I remembered it perfectly. That morning, as snow began dusting the city's copper roofs, I stood before the velvet panel in silence. I placed my palm flat and pressed. The latch clicked open like a whispered secret, Inside lay the last of it. Stacks of velvet boxes, glass display cases lined in suede, scrolls wrapped in linen bands. Things so old they had their own smell, history, sweat, salt, ambition. I had maintained this vault for over a decade. Cleaned it every April. Updated its inventory. Labeled everything with acid-free cards. I knew what each item meant to the Belvedere family. But more importantly now, I knew what each one could mean to someone else. The first thing I took out was the charter quill, a 17th-century writing instrument rumored to have signed the original treaty that gave Marcus's family their first shipping contract in Halifax. That same quill would be displayed next week at the National Writers' Hall as part of their Origins of Influence installation. I had already approved the curator's layout design and scheduled the press announcement. Beneath the velvet flap of the case was my personal note, to inspire new beginnings, from the Belvedere lineage. The quill no longer carried his family's name. It carried possibility. Each piece I touched, I photographed and documented. Not just its provenance, but its emotional impact. I wasn't erasing history, I was transforming it. There was a letter from Queen Victoria to Marcus's great-great-grandfather, commending his contributions to naval logistics. That would go to the Royal Maritime Archive in London. I had overnight the paperwork. Their director was stunned by the gift. "We've never received a direct donation of this scale," she said. "And from an American family. Remarkable." I smiled and typed, "The Belvederes believe legacy should sail further than ego." In the vault's right corner sat the most fragile item, the Eleanor ring. A coincidence, really, that we shared the name. It belonged to Marcus's grandmother, Eleanor Belvedere, and was passed only to women in the bloodline. I was always told I was not quite Belvedere enough to wear it. Victoria, Marcus's mother, reminded me every year during Christmas brunch. "You wear pearls well, Callista, but the Eleanor ring is for true heirs." That ring now sat in a cushioned box destined for the Women's History Collective, to be part of their exhibit, Inheritance and Identity, a timeline of patriarchy. Let the public wear it with pride. I packed each item into climate-proof containers, sealed with chain of custody tags. The documentation listed Marcus as the donor. A separate file contained handcrafted thank you letters, all written by me but signed with his name, traced 1,000 times over the years on cards he never remembered to send. I paused at the war medals next. His great-grandfather's entire military sash, earned during the Belgian resistance, was stored in a shadow box with a tiny brass plaque that read, "For service, not spectacle." It had always struck me as ironic, how they displayed that sash at every dinner party like a trophy instead of a memory. Now it would hang in a veterans' hospice, just above a doorway that led to a therapy room for amputees. Marcus wouldn't know until he read about it in the Sunday Tribune. The vault was almost empty now. I saved the last piece for myself. It wasn't valuable, not in money or heritage. It was a small compass, silver, tarnished, barely turning. I had found it tucked inside Marcus's father's writing desk the week we moved in. No label, no paperwork. But I remembered holding it when I first felt lost. When I first realized Marcus's love came with expectations, not sanctuary. I slipped it into my coat pocket. That evening, I made tea as usual. Earl Grey, with a splash of cream. Marcus came in late, still in his overcoat, cheeks red from the cold. "Sorry," he muttered, loosening his tie. "Meeting ran over. Klaus is really dragging his feet with the Rosedale project." I handed him his cup. He took it without looking me in the eye. "You're quiet tonight," he said. I smiled faintly. "Just thinking about Christmas." He leaned against the counter, sipping slowly. "This one's going to be different." I nodded. "It already is." He didn't ask what I meant. Maybe he was afraid of the answer. I went to bed before him. left the kitchen in its usual tidy state, laid out his cufflinks for the next day, the same gold pair passed down from his grandfather, shaped like chess pieces. But the real ones. The originals. They'd already been shipped off to the National Game Museum as part of their Tactics and Nobility series. Poetic, really. I stared at the ceiling that night, the faint glow of the hallway lights spilling into our room. I imagined Marcus's moment, the one he had been planning. The performative cruelty of Christmas morning. The speech. The shock. The legal documents folded like a present he couldn't wait to open. But what he didn't know was that I had already opened every vault. And by the time he delivered his betrayal, his kingdom would be gone. The legacy he wanted to weaponize. It now belonged to the people. And the only thing he'd be left with would be my name echoing through the exhibits. As the woman who turned silence into a symphony. By the time I sat across from Evelyn Belvedere at the tea salon on Maple Avenue, I had already donated 8 artifacts and orchestrated 3 media write-ups. Evelyn didn't know it, of course. To her, I was still the doting daughter-in-law, polite, composed, dutiful. Everything she had trained me to be. She stirred her chamomile tea with the family's signature sterling spoon, the one with the crest etched so faintly it looked like a scar. Marcus has been distracted lately, she said, her voice wrapped in perfume and judgment. Do you know what's occupying him? I smiled and folded my hands. He's been planning something. I believe it's going to be a Christmas to remember. She paused, mid-stir. Her lips tightened. He hasn't mentioned anything to me. I'm sure he will, I said softly. When the time is right. Evelyn didn't speak for a moment. She sipped her tea and studied me the way a hawk studies a field mouse, not because she was hungry, but because control was her nourishment. He always valued discretion, she murmured. It's one of our family's guiding traits. I nodded. Yes. Discretion. And precision. What she didn't know was that the very spoon she stirred her tea with, one of the 126-piece Victorian silver set, had already been pledged to a historical dining exhibit titled The Elegance of the Forgotten. They'd picked up the bulk of it 3 days ago. Only this spoon remained. And I wasn't about to take it from her fingers. No, this one, I wanted her to feel slip away on her own. That was always Evelyn's weakness. She believed control meant owning something forever. But she never understood that real control comes from knowing when to let go, and when to make others believe they still have something they lost long ago. When I returned to the mansion, Marcus was on the phone in his study, voice sharp, clipped, impatient. No, I didn't authorize any donation. Why would I? Yes, I understand the optics, but that's not the point. No, I won't make a statement. He didn't hear me come in. He never did. I watched his back, tense beneath his navy suit, as he paced in front of the fireplace. Above him, the massive oil portrait of William Belvedere still hung. For now. The museum in Charleston had agreed to feature it in their Industrial Kings of the East Coast exhibition. The shipping crates were already on their way. I slipped into the kitchen quietly, made myself tea, and opened my laptop. Tonight's release would be the Hemingway manuscript, the one his grandfather had hidden in a cigar box during the Spanish Civil War. I'd always thought the story was more fiction than fact, but the Belvedere myth machine didn't run on truth. It ran on impression. The city's literary archive was eager to make it their centerpiece. The press would eat it up. Legacy. Loss. Language. Marcus's voice echoed down the hallway. Yes, I want to know who at the shelter is leaking this. I didn't authorize any public statement. No, I'm not going to sue a children's hospital, don't be ridiculous. I sipped my tea. The manuscript would be unveiled at a gala in 2 nights. Under the lights, in a glass case, it would finally be read, by people who understood the power of words more than any Belvedere board member ever could. That night, Marcus didn't sleep. I heard the creak of the floorboards outside our bedroom. He was pacing again. He was unraveling. The next morning, Evelyn arrived unannounced. Her perfume reached the front foyer before she did. She entered like a general on a losing battlefield, scanning the room with tight eyes. "Where's the silver service?" she demanded. I blinked, feigning confusion. "Which one?" She looked at me like I'd grown horns. "The dining set. The one with the vine-etched rims." "Where is it, Callista?" "Oh," I said with careful neutrality. "Didn't Marcus tell you?" He felt it was time to do something meaningful with it. He donated the entire set to the city's homeless program. I believe they'll be using it for their Christmas Eve dinner. She swayed slightly, as if I'd slapped her. "To feed the homeless," she whispered. "With our silver." "With Marcus's silver," I corrected gently. She sat down hard on the nearest armchair. "You should be proud," I said. "It's already trending on the city's philanthropy feed. People are calling it the most elegant gesture of the year." Her mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. "He didn't, he wouldn't." She looked at me. Finally, truly looked at me. And something in her expression changed. For the first time in 15 years, she was afraid of me. The thought warmed me more than the tea. That evening, I opened the hallway cabinet, the one that housed the first edition Dickens set. They were beautiful, leather-bound, gold-embossed, untouched. Marcus had always insisted they be preserved behind glass. "Never read. They're artifacts, not literature," he once told me. Now they would sit on open shelves at the university's library, for young students to handle, study, absorb. To make meaning from. Isn't that what stories were meant for? I carefully labeled each one for transport. The student volunteer team was arriving in the morning. The dean had offered to host a press conference and asked if I would say a few words on Marcus's behalf. Of course, I'd replied. Marcus believes books are meant to live, not decay. Another lie. But one that felt far more honest than any truth he'd ever told me. Later that night, Marcus came into the kitchen. His face was pale. His lips tight. He held a single newspaper in his hand, folded open to the center spread. "Did you see this?" he asked. I took the paper from him. The headline read, "Belvedere Family Leads New Wave of Cultural Generosity. Exclusive, from military medals to literary masterpieces, the legacy of one of the city's most private families is now being given to the people." There was a photo beneath it, the Hemingway manuscript, its ink fading but fierce, behind a museum's spotlighted glass. Beneath the image, the caption read, "Asterisk, donated by Marcus Belvedere." Asterisk. He didn't speak. Just stared at me. I handed the paper back. "You've always said you wanted to make an impact," I said quietly. "Now you are." He stood still for a long time. "I didn't do this," he whispered. "Didn't you?" I asked, tilting my head. He opened his mouth. But there was nothing left to say. The next morning, Evelyn sent a letter, typed, not handwritten. It read, "Asterisk Callista, I don't know what you're doing, or how you're doing it, but I know it's you. Marcus may not see it yet. But I do. You were always the better strategist. Do what you must. But know this, we will not go quietly, asterisk." I folded the letter and placed it on the same shelf where her family's war medals had once sat. They weren't there anymore. All that remained was silence, empty velvet, and the growing weight of appearances they could no longer maintain. The gala was everything Marcus once loved, champagne, marble staircases, flashbulbs, power disguised as politeness. It was the city's most exclusive end-of-year affair, hosted by the Heritage Preservation Trust at the Belmont Hotel, where old money came to congratulate itself. The kind of night where Marcus thrived. The kind of night where I used to smile beside him, quietly ignored, perfectly ornamental. This year was different. This year, he wasn't holding court, he was being watched. The invitations had gone out weeks prior. The event promised a once-in-a-generation unveiling, a private collection of heirlooms donated anonymously under the banner of cultural preservation. The piece de resistance? The unveiling of the Belvedere Hemingway manuscript, now officially authenticated and gifted to the literary archive. Marcus still hadn't put the pieces together. He thought it was a fluke. A leak. A mistake someone else had made using his name. He hadn't yet grasped that it was me. That I was the architect. That I was repurposing his empire one velvet box at a time. We arrived separately. I wore black silk with emerald earrings, not the Belvedere emeralds, of course. Those had already found their home with the National Women's Legal Alliance to be auctioned for pro bono defense work. The earrings tonight were rented. Not because I had to, but because I liked the symbolism. Temporary. Tactical. Marcus arrived in a deep navy suit, the one tailored for him by DeCarlo's in Milan. His hair was too perfect. His smile was cracked around the edges. The kind of smile men wear when they've rehearsed for a room they no longer understand. When we locked eyes across the ballroom, I saw it. Doubt. And fear. I made my way to the press circle first. The director of the literary archive greeted me like an old friend. Callista. Oh, I'm so glad Marcus sent you. It's wonderful what you've both done. This is going to change everything. I nodded. Marcus has always had a deep love of language. The lie was sweet on my tongue. Nearby, journalists buzzed. Phrases like philanthropic revolution and cultural reckoning floated around like perfume. One even mentioned the Belvedere effect, the growing trend of families relinquishing hidden fortunes for public enrichment. Marcus moved toward me slowly, like a man crossing a frozen lake, unsure which step might crack the surface. Callista, he said under his breath. We need to talk. Later, I replied smoothly. You're about to be honored. What the hell is going on? I turned to him, and for the first time, I let the mask slip, just for a second. You planned to break me open in front of our family on Christmas Day, I whispered. You wanted an audience. Now you have one. Smile, Marcus. They're about to clap for you. His lips parted slightly, but before he could answer, the gala host took the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, please raise your glasses as we unveil one of the greatest cultural gifts our city has received this decade, a treasure from the Belvedere family, now made public for generations to come. Spotlights shifted. A curtain lifted. There it was. The manuscript. Fragile, ink-stained, brilliant. A sliver of literary history. Beneath it, in polished brass, donated by Marcus Belvedere. The applause was thunderous. He stood there frozen, caught in the glare. Dozens of hands clapping in his name. Eyes shining with admiration. Cameras clicking. But none of them knew he hadn't given a thing. That all the praise, all the headlines, all the gratitude, was built on something he tried to destroy. Me. Afterward, while the guests mingled and the champagne flowed, Marcus cornered me on the balcony overlooking the snowy courtyard. I never authorized this, he hissed. You're setting me up. You're ruining the family. No, I said calmly. I'm preserving it. Just not in the way you wanted. You forged my name. I honored your legacy. He stared at me, jaw tight. You're insane. No, Marcus, I said, stepping closer. I'm free. That's the difference. For a long moment, we stood there in silence. Then he turned and walked back inside, into the arms of the people cheering for him. Praising him. Believing in the illusion I had sculpted from betrayal. I stayed outside. The wind was sharp, but it felt clean. That night, after we returned home in separate cars, I took the last 6 boxes from the guest bedroom closet. The final wave. The Tiffany glassware. The ceremonial saber. The Parisian opera telescope. The lace christening gown from 1894. The bronze bust of Marcus's great-grandfather. The sapphire tiara Evelyn used to wear at foundation dinners. Each one had its place. Each one would vanish in the coming days. All under his name. The next morning, Evelyn called. You humiliated my son. I sipped my coffee. No, Evelyn. I saved him. You think this makes you noble? No. But it makes me something better than what you ever thought I was. She didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. I ended the call and opened the spreadsheet. Final phase, activated. Within 48 hours, the remaining artifacts would be dispersed. By the time Marcus reached for those divorce papers, he'd be standing in an empty kingdom, waving to crowds who thought he was a savior. While I stood in the silence behind the curtain, finally unburdened. Not broken, but rewritten. The Belvedere Christmas Eve dinner had always been a performance. White gloves. Polished silver. Candlelight set to classical cello. The family gathered not out of love but legacy, each person playing a role in the never-ending theater of wealth. This year, the stage was bare. The chandelier still sparkled above the table, but beneath its glow, everything else had changed. The grand oil portraits were gone. The glass cabinets that once housed baccarat crystal and Faberge trinkets now stood hollow, their shelves reflecting nothing but dust and discomfort. The ancient Persian rug had been replaced by modern parquet flooring, not out of choice, but because the rug now lay in the entrance hall of the Cultural Migration Archive, tagged and interpreted for immigrant heritage preservation. Marcus hadn't spoken to me all day. He'd retreated to his study since morning, the door locked, the lights off. I imagined him holding the divorce papers like a grenade, unsure whether to throw or bury them. He didn't know I had already invited the press for tomorrow's Christmas philanthropy showcase. He didn't know I had arranged for the Children's Hospital director to give a live thank you on air. He didn't know the story was no longer his to tell. Evelyn arrived first. Her hair was tighter than usual, her expression pulled like fine thread stretched to the edge of snapping. She entered the dining room, stopped, and inhaled sharply. The silver is gone. I nodded. Marcus donated it to the shelter. She blinked at me. The one downtown. With the neon cross. They'll be using it tonight. She clutched her handbag like a weapon. With real homeless people. Yes, I said gently. Real people. Real hunger. Real silver. Margot followed next, trailed by her eternally nervous husband, Daniel. Their eyes darted over the room. Where's the champagne fountain? She asked. Loaned to the Civic Ballet auction, I said. Marcus's Uncle Gareth stumbled in after, already smelling like port. Feels different this year, he mumbled. The dining table had been set with modern flatware. No gold-rimmed plates. No linen napkins woven with the family crest. Just clean, crisp white. Efficient. Public. Honest. By the time Marcus emerged, most of the family had arrived. He wore the navy jacket again. It no longer fit right. It clung to him like a costume that didn't believe in its actor anymore. He nodded at the guests without smiling, his eyes avoiding mine. Dinner was served. The roast was perfect. The conversation wasn't. "Marcus," Evelyn said sweetly, though the venom was thinly masked, "have you decided where the tiara will go?" He blinked. "What?" "The sapphire tiara," she clarified. "Callista mentioned your intention to donate it." He looked at me sharply. I gave a slow smile. "The Women's Equality Museum," I said. "They're thrilled. They're featuring it in an exhibit titled Inheritance Interrupted." Daniel choked slightly on his wine. Margot set down her fork. "So it's true," she said. "All the rumors. You're giving it all away." Marcus looked like he wanted to scream. "I thought it was time," I said. "To give the legacy room to breathe." Evelyn leaned forward. "You've humiliated us." "I've liberated you," I said softly. "You just don't recognize freedom yet." Marcus stood abruptly, knocking over his chair. "Excuse me." He stormed from the room. No one followed. We finished dinner in silence. After dessert, I stepped into the parlor, now mostly bare. The fireplace flickered. The room was emptier than it had ever been, and somehow warmer. Marcus stood in the hallway, facing the mirror where the family portrait used to hang. His reflection was alone. He turned as I approached. "You've destroyed everything," he said. "No," I replied. "I've made sure it means something." He held up the envelope. "I was going to give you this tomorrow." I stared at it. "The divorce papers. What's stopping you now?" I asked. He faltered. "They think I'm a hero." "They do." "I didn't earn it." "No," I said. "But I did. And I gave it to you." He lowered the envelope slowly. "Why?" "Because you wanted to burn me down in front of everyone I loved. And instead, I built a monument to who I used to be, in your name." He blinked, shaken. "You still want to go through with it?" I asked, nodding at the papers. He hesitated. "I don't know what's left." "Only the truth," I said. "And your shadow in it." I walked away, leaving him alone with the only thing he had left to hold, the illusion of his legacy. In the guest room, I checked the media schedule one last time. The headlines were cued. The thank you videos were edited. The final donation releases were synchronized to drop at 11:55 a.m. on Christmas Day. 5 minutes before he ever planned to serve those papers. A perfect ambush. Not of hate, but of history. By the time Marcus tried to tear me down, the world would be standing to applaud. The snow fell heavier on Christmas morning than it had all season, thick, silent, ceremonial. I stood in the kitchen at 10:45 a.m., arranging pastries on a simple ceramic tray. Not the royal porcelain, of course. That had been rehomed at the National Decorative Arts Museum, where schoolchildren would now marvel at its detail instead of listening to Evelyn pontificate about its exclusivity. Upstairs, Marcus was rehearsing. I could hear the subtle pacing above me, the faint creak of hardwood under his footfalls. He hadn't said a word since last night. But I knew what he was planning. What he'd always been planning. The dramatic reveal. The blindsiding. The "we tried" speech. He likely practiced the way his voice would crack, just enough to appear noble, not guilty. But I was 5 minutes ahead of him. Exactly 5. At 11:50 a.m., I walked into the foyer and greeted the first reporter. "Happy holidays," I said with practiced warmth. She smiled wide, eyes sparkling behind her camera-ready mascara. "Thank you for inviting us, Mrs. Belvedere. The city is in awe of your family's generosity." I nodded. It's time we opened the doors wider. By 11:54, 4 other media crews had joined her in the drawing room. A local morning show. A cultural digest publication. A small network covering non-profit news. Even a foreign correspondent intrigued by what he called the sudden renaissance of old American families. "Will Mr. Belvedere be giving a speech today?" one asked. I smiled. "Oh, I imagine he will." At 11:55 a.m. sharp, my phone buzzed with simultaneous notifications. Scheduled releases, queued weeks in advance, were now live across every major platform. The Historical Society posted the full digitized Belvedere Ledger archive. The National Women's Legal Alliance unveiled the Emerald Tiara donation. The Children's Hospital streamed a video of kids playing under the towering grandfather clock, now considered the heartbeat of their new wing. The Literary Archive posted a video of the Hemingway manuscript in its permanent glass case, beneath a sign that read, Asterisk gifted by Marcus Belvedere, in honor of collective wisdom. Asterisk. And finally, the Civic Ballet shared images of a refugee child spinning across the stage, lit by the Belvedere chandelier. The world saw it all. The phones in the room buzzed simultaneously. The reporters leaned into their screens, their eyes widening. Heads lifted. Cameras adjusted. "This is extraordinary," one whispered. Just then, Marcus descended the stairs. He was wearing the gray three-piece suit he reserved for court and funerals. His shoulders were tense, but his expression was composed, the mask of a man who still thought he held the cards. In his breast pocket, the envelope peeked out. I stepped aside, watching the moment unfold like a director behind a curtain. He crossed into the drawing room, and stopped. Dozens of eyes turned to him. Flashes fired. Microphones raised. "Mr. Belvedere," someone called. "Would you like to comment on your historic donation campaign? What inspired such a sweeping act of philanthropy? Did you plan the timing with your wife?" Marcus blinked. I. He hadn't seen it coming. He was drowning in praise for something he didn't understand. Buried under thank yous he didn't earn. They smiled at him like he was the city's savior. The man who had opened generations of guarded wealth for public good. "Callista," he hissed, turning to me. "What is this?" I stepped forward, loud enough for the microphones to catch. "The Belvedere family has always believed in legacy," I said. "This year, we decided legacy meant more when it's shared." Marcus led the way. Applause erupted. He stared at me, eyes wide, lips parted. Then, slowly, his hand reached toward his jacket. The envelope. I saw it coming like a ripple across still water. He pulled it out. The thick ivory paper looked smaller now. In his fingers, it trembled. But before he could speak, one of the reporters leaned forward. "Sir, is that another donation announcement?" Cameras clicked. "No," he said hoarsely. It must be something important," another pressed. Given the moment. His hand lowered slightly. He looked around, at the smiling reporters, at the applause, at the flashing bulbs and curious stares. At the history echoing around him. And he crumbled. The envelope slipped from his fingers. It landed on the Persian carpet, the only remnant left behind, purposefully, as a symbol. The cameras caught it. One reporter reached down to grab it, but I moved faster, stepping in gently. "I'll take that," I said smoothly. I turned it over once, then tucked it under my arm. Marcus stared at me, unblinking. I whispered, just for him. "Your surprise came early." Then I turned back to the crowd. "The final piece of the Belvedere archive," I said, lifting the envelope. "We're preparing to donate this to the Museum of Truth." Laughter. Light, uncertain, then warm. Marcus stepped backward, his face pale, mouth slack. In that moment, he realized. There was no divorce. Not one he could serve. Because the court of public opinion had already tried him. And I was the only one who walked away clean. The silence after the storm was always the most revealing. 2 days had passed since the Christmas Day ambush. The city still buzzed with praise for Marcus Belvedere, the heir-turned humanitarian, the quiet revolutionary, the man who gave away an empire without ever uttering a word. Local outlets had dubbed it the Giving Reclamation. A national morning show ran a 10-minute segment titled Legacy for the People. Commentators speculated about his motives, his vision, his modern humility. He hadn't left the house since. The man who once couldn't stand silence now walked its hallways like a ghost, trailing shame in his perfectly ironed shirts. I'd heard him once, early in the morning, murmuring on the phone, "I didn't. I never approved." No, I can't say that publicly. But it was too late. The myth had overtaken the man. And I had written every chapter of it. I spent the days fielding requests on Marcus's behalf, keynote invitations, humanitarian awards, honorary board seats. I forwarded each one to the email address I'd set up, legacy@belvederefoundation.org. It wasn't real, of course. Just a holding pen. A mirror for him to watch himself in. The divorce papers remained sealed in my study drawer. He hadn't asked for them since Christmas. Because he knew, the moment he tried, the story would fracture. The illusion would collapse. The saint of generosity can't serve betrayal from the pulpit of public admiration. Evelyn, to her credit, adapted quickly. She issued a statement to the City Society column. We always raised Marcus to be a man of substance. This was never about possessions, but purpose. We are so proud of his leadership during this season of giving. Marcus read it aloud at breakfast, his voice flat. She thinks I planned it, he muttered. She has to, I said. Otherwise, it makes her irrelevant. He didn't respond. Instead, he walked out to the garden, where the Belvedere marble statues once stood. Now, it was just empty pedestals, like erased memories. That night, I received a text from Margot. Whatever you did, you made him matter more than he ever did. Just thought you should know, I didn't reply. Because I wasn't done yet. The next morning, I received an official invitation to a city council meeting. They wanted to name a community plaza after Marcus, Belvedere Square, to honor his visionary restructuring of legacy in service of the public. I accepted the invitation. On his behalf. When I told him over dinner, he choked slightly on his wine. They're naming a square after me. I nodded. In the park near St. Catherine's. He looked down. You're not going to stop, are you? No, I said softly. But you can. He looked up sharply. You can take credit, I added. You can give speeches, shake hands, wear medals. Or you can tell them the truth. He didn't answer. Because he couldn't. That was the final brilliance of it all. The only way he could undo what I'd done, was to destroy himself publicly. He had trapped me in a marriage of appearances. Now, I had trapped him in a myth of virtue. Days later, I visited the children's hospital again. The grandfather clock stood proudly in the lobby, garland wrapped gently around its golden edges. A young girl in a wheelchair sat beside it, staring up in awe. Her father smiled at me as I passed. You must be Mrs. Belvedere, he said. My daughter talks to the clock every day. Says it listens. I smiled. It always kept time for the wrong reasons. I'm glad it's learning new ones. He looked puzzled, but I didn't explain. Not everything needed to be said. Sometimes revenge isn't fireworks. It's a quiet reclaiming. A redistribution of power. A steady dismantling of the systems that told you your place was beside, not beyond. That night, Marcus handed me a box. Inside were the cufflinks his father had given him, the real ones, not the ones I'd already donated. These were a backup pair he kept in his sock drawer. "Why are you giving me these?" I asked. He looked tired. Small. "I don't want them anymore," he said. "But I don't want them somewhere public either." I nodded once, then took them. I placed them on the mantel beside the divorce papers, still unopened. "I'll file them soon," I said. He didn't argue. Instead, he walked away. And for the first time in 15 years, I didn't feel the need to follow. I was no longer a curator of his legacy. I was the author of my own. The envelope stayed where I left it, nestled atop the mantel, beside the abandoned cufflinks, beneath the ticking silence of the absent clock. Marcus passed it every morning. Sometimes he paused, just for a second, like a man eyeing a landmine he planted himself and no longer trusted. He never picked it up. Because he couldn't. Not after what I'd done. Not after what the world had seen. You can't hand someone divorce papers on the heels of sainthood. The city had canonized him. Every week brought another headline. Asterisk, Belvedere legacy inspires wealth redistribution movement. Asterisk asterisk, anonymous giving. Not anymore, the Marcus method takes hold. Asterisk asterisk, from empire to empathy, one man's quiet revolution. Asterisk. And Marcus, he let them believe it. He gave a speech at Belvedere Square, even smiled through a television interview with the mayor. He talked about social responsibility, and a shifting generational wealth, and what my wife and I believe in. I watched the interview from the sunroom, the one that used to hold the Belvedere chess table. He sat straight, his tie immaculate, his voice calm. Only his eyes betrayed him. They weren't proud. They were haunted. Afterward, the phone rang off the hook, journalists, donors, foundations wanting him on panels, boards, plaques. He declined most of them. But not all. He still wanted to be seen, just not questioned. And that, of course, was the very heart of it. Powerful men only survive when the narrative suits them. So Marcus didn't deny my campaign. He inherited it. Like he inherited everything else. Until now. The day I filed the divorce papers was a Friday. Quiet. Cold. Unremarkable. I didn't tell him. I didn't leave a note. I simply folded the documents, placed them in my handbag, and walked into my lawyer's office at noon. He read the papers silently, nodding. "You're sure you want this filed under your name?" "Yes," I said. "And not as a countersuit?" "No," I replied. "I'm not countering anything. I'm concluding it." By Monday, the notice was public record. By Tuesday, the phone calls began. The media was careful at first. Curious. Confused. Asterisk, is it true? Asterisk asterisk, is it amicable? Asterisk asterisk, is the foundation still active? Asterisk. I let the silence speak for itself. Marcus came home that evening holding a tabloid in one hand, his expression unreadable. "This is going to get messy," he said. "No," I replied. "It's going to get honest. You could have just told me." "I did," I said. "Every day you pretended I didn't exist. Every day you looked through me like I was furniture. Every time you saved your best face for the world and your worst voice for me. I told you 1,000 times." He sat down heavily. "There's nothing left," he said. "There's freedom," I corrected. The next day, Evelyn called again. "Tell me this is a phase." "It's not." But the foundation will go on. Without the marriage. She inhaled sharply. Marcus is being torn apart online. Not by me. I know, she said bitterly. That's the problem. Because I hadn't exposed him. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't burned it down. I just walked away. And somehow, that destroyed him more. At the next foundation board meeting, Marcus didn't attend. He sent a proxy. When they asked about the future of the Belvedere name, I answered simply, it continues, just not attached to illusion. They clapped. I smiled. That week, I received a letter, real ink, real paper. It was from the director of the National Museum of Women's History. Kalista. Thank you. Not just for the tiara, or the linens, or the archives. But for reminding us what power looks like when it's quiet, strategic, and female. You didn't just donate objects. You rewrote who gets to hold the pen. With admiration. Dr. Eliza Moore. I pinned the letter on the corkboard in my new office, the one overlooking the Belvedere Square fountain. They'd built it in the shape of an open hand. Marcus stood near it sometimes. I saw him once from above, hands in his coat pockets, staring at the water. Not moving. Not speaking. Just watching. I wondered what he saw in his reflection. A giver. A fraud. A shadow. It didn't matter anymore. Because now, the story belonged to me. I used to think legacy was something fixed, like stone. Cold. Heavy. Unmoving. I believed that for years, because that's what the Belvederes wanted me to believe. That legacy was a thing handed down, guarded, locked behind velvet ropes and generations of gatekeeping. But I was wrong. Legacy is fluid. Legacy is motion. And mine had finally begun. 3 months after the divorce filing, I officially launched the Kalista Initiative, a nonprofit focused on redistributing dormant wealth from private collections into public use. We didn't just take heirlooms, we transformed them into scholarships, museum exhibits, accessible archives, and historical storytelling projects led by underrepresented voices. The first major feature ran in modern air. The woman who gave away his legacy, and made her own. It went viral within 24 hours. Not because it was scandalous. But because it was surgical. It detailed how I turned every act of betrayal into an act of redefinition. How the quiet work of a woman behind the scenes became the framework for a national movement. Marcus never spoke publicly about the divorce. He couldn't. His silence became its own kind of statement, one the world chose to interpret in the most generous way possible. He let her shine, they said. He stepped aside, others assumed. But those of us who knew the truth, we didn't correct them. Some myths are more useful than facts. I received hundreds of letters. From women who'd been erased in boardrooms, marriages, families. From daughters who were never entrusted with the family jewels, only the obligation to smile politely while their brothers inherited the vaults. From artists, historians, museum workers, all of them writing the same thing. Thank you for proving we can tell our stories too. I hosted my first major fundraising gala that spring. We held it at the very same Belmont Hotel ballroom where Marcus had once been celebrated under false praise. Only this time, the spotlight was intentional, and mine. The Hemingway manuscript now stood proudly beside letters from immigrant poets, transcribed oral histories, and protest songs once deemed unworthy of preservation. Everything mattered now. Not because of its price, but because of its voice. Margot attended, arriving alone in a sleek black suit and a wry smile. Mother says she's starting a fund, she told me over a glass of rose. For what? Preserving aristocratic traditions. I laughed. Sounds like a long uphill climb. She says it's necessary, Margot smirked. But privately, she keeps telling people she was the one who taught you everything. Of course she did. Even in exile, Evelyn Belvedere couldn't stand to be irrelevant. Marcus? I asked. Margot sighed. He's quieter now. Teaches one-night class at the university. Ethics and law. I blinked. That's bold. He's good at theory. Bad at practice, she said, then raised her glass. But somehow, people still listen. We clinked our glasses. After the gala, I walked the empty exhibit hall alone. Each artifact, once a weapon of status, now breathed new purpose. New eyes stared at them. New meaning bloomed. The ring that was never mine. The clock I was never allowed to wind. The books I was told not to touch. All now belonged to everyone. And it was beautiful. Later that night, as I stepped out into the city air, I saw him. Marcus. Standing at the edge of the square. Watching the fountain he never asked for. Reading the plaque that bore his name but none of his truth. He didn't wave. Neither did I. But in that moment, I knew we understood the same thing. He couldn't take it back. Not the legacy. Not the story. Not the future. He had planned to erase me from history. But instead, I became it. The spring air was warmer than expected, carrying with it the faint scent of lilac and liberation. I stood beneath the arched entrance of the newly renovated Easton Public Library, the final ribbon in my hand, the final donation ready to be unveiled. Inside, the Belvedere collection, now renamed the Shared Legacy Wing, was complete. Not a shrine to wealth, but a living archive of transformation. The same manuscripts, jewels, documents, and artifacts that were once guarded behind heavy doors were now housed in glass open to children, artists, teachers, and anyone who ever felt unwelcome in history's telling. The mayor gave a speech. The press lined the walls. Camera shutters clicked like applause. But I didn't speak this time. I didn't need to. Because the final gift was never meant for the city. It was for me. That morning, I had received the court's final decree. The divorce was official. There was no drama. No protest from Marcus. He signed quietly, in private, as if hoping that maybe silence would spare him again. But silence no longer protected him. It protected me. In the envelope was the final paper bearing my name, not his. I held it in my hand, lighter than I expected. And with that, I stepped fully out of his shadow. Not as his wife. Not as a curator. Not even as the ghost of the woman he tried to destroy. But as Callista. A woman who had mastered the quiet art of unraveling. A woman who learned that revenge doesn't always wear blood-red heels or speak in courtrooms. Sometimes, it wears a soft smile, a press release, and a donation receipt with someone else's signature. That week, the museum featured a new installation, a small, unassuming corner with a single velvet-lined box. Inside was a silver compass. The plaque read, Asterisk, anonymous, found in the drawer of a woman who redrew the map. Asterisk. It was the only artifact I didn't donate under Marcus's name. Because it wasn't his. It had guided me when I felt lost. When I had no voice, no power, and no plan. It reminded me that direction doesn't come from tradition. It comes from choice. And I had chosen everything. Later that night, I returned to the house, no longer the Belvedere estate, but mine. Legally. Emotionally. Quietly. Marcus had moved into a rental downtown, near the law school. He never asked for the furniture. Or the portraits. Or even the name. He didn't have to. Because I left him exactly what he gave me. Silence. But in mine, there was peace. And power. I made tea. Sat by the window. Opened my notebook and wrote. He wanted to leave me with nothing. So I gave everything away, and became everything in the process. Then I closed the page and let the ink dry. Some stories don't end with fire or fury. Some end with a woman, sitting in her favorite chair, surrounded by books she once wasn't allowed to touch, sipping tea from a mug that no longer bears anyone else's crest. The empire was gone. The silence was mine. And the last gift was freedom.